The bell above the door rang at exactly 6:47 in the evening, and when I turned to see who it was, my hand started shaking so badly that the coffee pot I was holding slipped from my fingers and shattered against the tile floor, hot coffee splashing across my boots, glass scattering everywhere like tiny stars, and I didn't even look down, because standing in the doorway of my failing diner, wearing a coat I remembered buying her 12 years ago, was the one person I never thought I'd see again. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that life sometimes gives back what it once took away, I want you to hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me you're watching, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to this channel, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about loss, about waiting, and about love that refuses to die quietly. My name is Daniel Hartley, and 3 years before that evening, I was a man who had already buried the best parts of himself. I owned a small diner on the corner of Maple and 9th, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and a jukebox that only half worked, the kind of place my father built with his own hands in 1979 and that I inherited along with all his debts and none of his charm. I wasn't a natural at this. I was a mechanic before the diner, good with engines, terrible with people, and when my father died and left me the restaurant, I told myself I'd sell it within the year. That was 11 years ago. I never sold it, because somewhere along the way, it stopped being his dream and started being the only thing tethering me to a life that had otherwise fallen apart. The reason I needed tethering was her. Her name was Claire, and she had been my wife for 9 years before she left, though left isn't really the right word, because leaving implies choice, and what happened to us wasn't really a choice at all. We had a daughter, Molly, born with a heart condition so rare that only 4 hospitals in the country knew how to treat it properly, and for 6 years we drove back and forth between our small town and the children's hospital 3 states away, watching our savings disappear, watching our marriage buckle under a weight neither of us had the strength to carry alone. Claire believed in fighting until the very last second. I believed in it too, until the day the doctors sat us down in a room with soft lighting and softer voices and told us there was nothing left to try. Molly passed away on a Tuesday in October, 7 years old, and something in both of us passed away with her. Grief does strange things to people. It doesn't always bring you closer to the person who understands your pain best. Sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes you look at the person who shares your loss and all you can see is a mirror reflecting back the exact same devastation you're trying to escape, and you can't stand to look at it, and so you start looking away, and looking away becomes staying away, and staying away becomes silence, and one morning 8 months after we lost Molly, Claire packed 2 suitcases and told me she couldn't breathe in that house anymore, that every room held a ghost, that she needed to go somewhere the walls didn't remember our daughter's laughter. I didn't stop her. That's the part I've never forgiven myself for. I stood in the kitchen with my coffee going cold in my hands and I watched my wife walk out the door, and I said nothing, because I was drowning too, and I didn't have enough air left in my lungs to ask her to stay. For 3 years, I heard almost nothing. A mutual friend mentioned she'd moved to Portland. Someone else said she'd gone back to school, something in nursing, maybe grief counseling, I was never sure. I threw myself into the diner because it was the only thing that couldn't leave me. I worked mornings until nights, hired and lost employees, watched the regulars grow older, watched the town quietly forget my name outside of the guy who runs that place on Maple Street. I stopped dating. I stopped hoping. I told myself that some people simply get one chance at happiness, and mine had already come and gone, and the rest of my life would just be about getting through each day without falling apart in front of customers who ordered eggs over easy and had no idea the man cooking them had nothing left inside. The diner was struggling badly by that final winter. A new highway bypass had rerouted traffic away from Main Street, and my regulars, loyal as they were, couldn't keep the lights on by themselves. I was 3 months behind on the lease. I'd started selling pieces of my father's old tools just to make payroll for my one remaining waitress, a sharp, kind-eyed woman named Rosa who probably kept that place alive longer than it deserved to survive, simply because she refused to let me close it while she still had breath to argue with me about it. I remember standing in the walk-in cooler 2 days before that Tuesday in December, staring at shelves that were emptier than they should have been, doing math in my head that never came out right, wondering if this was finally the week I had to admit defeat and let my father's dream, and the only real distraction from my grief, disappear for good. That's where I was, mentally and financially, on the evening the bell rang at 6:47. I'd like to pause here and ask you again, if this story is resonating with you even a little, to like this video and leave a comment with one word that describes how you're feeling right now, because it helps this story reach more people who might need to hear it, and I promise you, what comes next is worth staying for. When I turned around and saw her standing there, my first thought wasn't relief, and it wasn't joy. It was fear. 3 years of silence had convinced me that if Claire ever came back, it would only be to finalize things properly, to sign papers, to close a door gently instead of the way she'd left it hanging open. My chest tightened the way it used to when the hospital called with test results. She looked different, thinner in the face, her hair longer, streaked with a few strands of gray that hadn't been there before, but her eyes were exactly the same, and when they found mine across that half-empty diner, something passed between us that 3 years and 400 miles hadn't managed to erase. She didn't say anything at first. She walked past the booths, past Rosa, who froze mid-step with a coffee pot of her own, and she stopped about 3 feet in front of me, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of lavender she always wore, and for a moment neither of us moved, because some silences hold entire years inside them, and you don't want to be the one who breaks them wrong. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded photograph, its edges worn soft from handling, and held it out to me with a hand that trembled slightly. I took it without looking away from her face, and when I finally glanced down, I saw a picture of Molly, maybe 4 years old, sitting on the hood of my old truck in the sun, laughing at something outside the frame, a photo I didn't even remember existed. Claire's voice, when it finally came, was quiet, almost apologetic, as if she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times on the drive over and still couldn't get the words to come out the way she wanted. She told me she had spent the last 3 years running from every room, every photograph, every memory that reminded her of what we lost, believing that distance was the only medicine strong enough for a wound that deep. She told me she'd built a life of sorts in Portland, quiet and careful, structured entirely around avoiding anything that could make her feel again. And she told me that 2 weeks earlier, a coworker at the clinic where she now worked as a grief counselor had lost her own daughter, and Claire had sat with that grieving mother for hours, and something about holding someone else's pain finally cracked open the wall she'd built around her own. She said she realized, sitting in that hospital hallway with a stranger's grief in her hands, that running from love because it once caused you pain doesn't make you safe, it just makes you alone, and she said she didn't want to be alone anymore, and she didn't want me to be alone anymore either, not if there was any part of me still willing to try. I want to be honest with you, because this isn't the kind of video where I'll tell you everything was instantly perfect, because it wasn't. Grief doesn't reverse itself just because someone walks back through a door. But standing there in my dying diner, holding a photograph of the daughter we both loved more than our own survival, listening to the woman I never stopped loving admit that she'd been drowning too, something inside my chest loosened for the first time in 3 years. I didn't say anything smooth or cinematic. I just reached out and pulled her into the kind of embrace that isn't romantic so much as it's two exhausted people finally putting down a weight they'd been carrying alone for far too long. Rosa, I found out later, quietly locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, giving us a privacy neither of us thought to ask for. That was the night everything changed, but not in the way you might expect from a movie. Claire didn't move back in with me the next day. We didn't pretend 3 years of separate pain could be undone in a single conversation. Instead, she stayed in town for a week, then flew back to Portland to give proper notice at her clinic, and we talked every single night on the phone the way we probably should have talked during the worst of our marriage instead of retreating into silence. She moved back permanently 4 months later, not into our old house, which we eventually sold, unable to live with all those ghosts, but into a small rental 2 streets over from the diner, close enough that she started coming in most mornings before her new job at the county hospital, close enough that Rosa started setting aside her favorite booth without being asked. The diner survived, by the way, though barely, and not because of some miracle windfall. Claire started helping with the books, discovered I'd been undercharging for the dinner specials for 6 straight years, restructured the menu, and convinced me to start a small grief support meetup on Tuesday evenings after close, using the diner's back room, free coffee for anyone who needed somewhere to sit with their pain without judgment. Word spread. People started coming from towns over. The diner that once nearly closed became, oddly enough, known throughout the county as much for those Tuesday meetings as for the food, and slowly, the tables filled again, not with strangers, but with people who needed exactly what Claire and I had needed and hadn't known how to ask for. We didn't remarry right away. We took our time, the way you're supposed to take your time when you're rebuilding something instead of starting fresh, and honestly, some days were still hard, some anniversaries still gutted us both quietly in our own corners of the house. But we stopped running from each other's pain, and somewhere in learning to sit inside grief together instead of separately, we found something that felt less like the marriage we lost and more like a second one, built slower, built gentler, built by 2 people who finally understood that love after loss isn't about forgetting, it's about carrying the weight together. Before I close this out, if this story moved you even a little, I need you to do something for me. Comment the word "believe" below if you think second chances are real, because I read every single one of them, and it means more to me than you know that strangers on the internet took the time to sit with our story. And if you're watching this while carrying your own grief, your own silence, your own door that's been closed for far too long, I hope you'll consider this a gentle nudge that it's not always too late to knock. Some people do come back. Some love does survive the unbearable. And sometimes, the best surprise you'll ever have is realizing that the person who once broke your heart is also the only one who can help you learn how to carry it again. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it today, and subscribe for more stories like this one, because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for exactly the reminder you just received.